Okay, I think I got this camera working. Always turn the camera on and I forget what I'm going to say. I'm going to do something different in this podcast. Normally it's just me reading stories, which I'm sure could get boring to some people. In this podcast, I have a recording of a gentleman who, this recording I took 6 years ago. It was before I ever started my YouTube channel and the Dixiecryptid What If It's True podcast. The name of the man will be familiar to you. His name is, to most people, is Bear Jim King. He used to be on the Bigfoot Crossroads podcast, which is the podcast that got me interested in not Bigfoot, but really good, strange storytelling. People who could relate a story that was interesting and funny, conveyed with emotion, all those things that wrap up good storytelling. Those guys on that podcast, I don't think they'll ever be beat. Bear, Coonbo, Matt Knapp, who have all gone on, with the exception of Bear, to have their own podcast. They had some little kerfuffle with the Bigfoot Outlaws. I wasn't involved with that. I don't care about any of that. But to give you a little background, I had gone on a camping trip. I won't go into the details of how I got into it because I wasn't involved in any Bigfoot groups at all, ever. I'm still not. But I thought it'd be interesting to go camping with them. An invitation was put out. I went and met a bunch of these people. This is where I met the people that I still love today in this topic. Mark Newble, Larry Porch, Bear. I'm trying to think of some of the other people. Dan Rickey. I'm trying to think of some of the other names. Anyway, I met those people. I loved them all. They treated me like gold. They were just the nicest people in the world. So I got to know Bear. Not like we were hanging out or anything. He lives over in Alabama and I live up in Mississippi. But he spent a lot of time up in this area, so he knew this area. He was on his way up to West Tennessee for something, and he dropped by my house. And I rode with him up to Shiloh, and we spent some time up at Shiloh. I didn't have much going on at the time. And I asked him, I said, can I record some of your stories? They're so good. I'd love to record some of your stories. He goes, yeah, man, come on. And the intention was to maybe try to put together a book. We still may do that. I don't know. Heck, I don't even have time to write Steve Lilly right now, and that's kind of the stuff I love to write. But I talked to Bear. I had not talked to him in 2 or 3 years, and I called him about a month ago. I said, you know, I've still got some of these recordings, and I would never share these on my podcast without his blessing because I just don't do that. I don't, you know, it's great content and all that stuff. I just didn't want to do it. So 6 years later, I give him a call. I'm like, what do you think about me putting some of these on your podcast? And in typical fashion of Bear, he goes, man, go right ahead. I don't care, whatever. So I just finished editing one of about 6 audio files that I have. It's not many. I don't think these are stories he's told before, but they're very coherent. This is just a good story. And I think if you follow the Bigfoot topic, you'll be very interested in this. If you don't follow the Bigfoot topic, which is great, and you just love good storytelling, you are going to really enjoy listening to him talk. You may have never heard him talk, but he's a guy from the South. One of his trademark things that he says is we call them boogers in the South, which is what the title of this podcast is. So I hope you enjoy this. It's a little different. This is the week before Thanksgiving, and I've been wanting to do this for a while, but again, I wasn't going to do it without his okay on it. He said okay, so we're going to do it. And over the next few weeks, when I have time to edit these other audio files, I'll put more up. So now you know what this is, and I hope you enjoy it. And I don't really like being in front of the camera, but I thought if you saw my face, that you know I'm sincere when I say that I believe every word he says in this audio. I have no reason to doubt anything he says, and you'll know why when you hear it. This is Jim's and his family's very first experience with Bigfoot in South Central Mississippi. It's a very interesting story. I hope you enjoy it. All right, here we go.
It was a hot, salty night, August, in north central Mississippi, 1966. The reason I know the date is because my father had just left my mother, and I'd always known that he left when my baby sister was 6 weeks old. I know that my baby sister was born the end of June. So if you add up the weeks, and I was told that he left when my baby sister was 6 weeks old, it had to be occurring in the middle of June. I mean, in the middle. We lived in a home that he had built 6 years earlier when he met my mom. It was on my grandfather's property. That's the only acre of land off my granddaddy's place to this day that I currently do not own, because my mom had to sell it after Dad and Mom divorced. She couldn't make the house payments, not on a one salary. But anyhow, I figure roughly now it's been maybe a week, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks after my dad had vacated the premises. We did not have an air conditioner, so what we would do, it was a 2-bedroom house, and we would put a box fan in the dining room at the north end of the house with the flow of air blowing outward, and we would open up our windows in our bedroom, which the bedroom where me and my brother slept was on the southeast corner of the house, and my mother's room, which had my baby sister's bassinet and everything, was just across the hallway from us on the southwest side of the house. And we had the windows open and the curtains open to, of course, we had screens on the windows to keep the insects from coming inside. And I know it was at night. I have no clue what time at night. I didn't care about time. As a child, 6 years old, you don't think about that. Me and my 4-year-old brother was sleeping in the same bedroom together in the same bed, with the bed up against the west wall. The foot of the bed was the window looking back on the back side of the property. When my dad and them pushed off the land to build the house, they pushed all the extra dirt because they was kind of cutting into a bluff to level off the house place, and it made sort of a hill which led up to a bigger hill behind the house. Of course, my grandfather had to fence it off with barbed wire fence. I know he had 5-strand barbed wire fences because when I got older, I've helped him replace every fence post and wire on the whole dang place. Even at 6 years old, I knew that it was at least a 5-strand barbed wire fence, which stands anywhere from about 4 to 4.5 foot tall. Sometime during that night, and it may have been early, it could have been late, who knows, something woke me up outside that window. And of course, when I raised up off the pillow that I was lying upon, my eyes were already adjusted or adapted to the outside light. It may have, I don't know at that stage in August whether what moon phase it was, but it was pretty clear. You could see basically pretty much out in the back up to the top of that hill where the fence line was. Of course, behind the fence line, the hill and the trees blended in a little bit, but there was a break between the fence line and an old fire break that my granddaddy always would put around the perimeter of his fence. Something on that hill was making a cooing, clicking type noise. The cooing was like a dove, basically, only a lot deeper in volume. It was going woo, woo, woo. Then it'd start going like you clucking your tongue when you trying to call a horse in or a dog. And then it would go back to woo, woo, woo. Well, that was the noise that woke me up. And so I just looked out the window at the foot of the bed towards the east of the house, and I seen something on that barbed wire fence, and it really blew my mind what I was looking at. Whatever it was draped over the top of that fence. It looked like, and this is the only way I could describe it, the biggest damn monkey I ever seen in my life.
Were you just seeing a silhouette?
No.
You could see facial details?
No, couldn't see facial details. The fence from the window was probably 12, 15 yards away. But what I could see was it was slowly, while it was making this sound, swaying its head and its shoulders to its right and back to its left in a slow motion. That's what caught my attention.
So if it hadn't been moving, you may not have seen it, right?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I just knew that what I was looking at, I was looking towards what woke me up, which was the sound. And then I noticed this thing slowly swaying on this fence line. Then I noticed that both of its arms were draped over the barbed wire fence and almost dragging the ground on the other side. Now figure that out. If the fence, and I know the barbed wire fence on an average was a 5-strand fence, probably 4.5 foot, possibly even up to 5 foot tall, and its arms were draped over that fence, almost the knuckle part of it was almost dragging the ground on this side, the side that I was on. Well, I'm 6 years old. As I said earlier, the first thing that popped into my head was, what's a large monkey? Because, see, I remembered Mama taking us to the zoo in Memphis, and we seen apes. I didn't know what an ape was. I knew it was a monkey. It kind of reminded me of the arm length of a chimpanzee that I'd seen at the zoo. So I was automatically thinking it was a monkey. Couldn't tell you what color it was. It was dark. It was making those cooing and clicking noise. Of course, I had to wake my brother up. So my brother slept. I slept on the outside, opposite of the doorway in the hallway, but he slept on the side was right there by the door. So I woke my brother up, and I said, "Hey, look at that! Look outside! Look at that monkey outside!" Well, he woke up enough to register what I said, woke up enough to register to listen, and he was hearing this cooing and this clicking noise too. Then he looks out the window and sees this thing swaying back and forth, but it didn't take no persuasion for him to haul ass. He was a type, my brother, you'd have to know, it wasn't that he was scared of anything, he just never stuck around to figure out if he should be. So once he got a gander or a good look at this thing, he hauled ass right across the hall into my mama's room. Now, all this is reflection back over the years after thinking about it after the fact. But I noticed when he left the room, fear is contagious. There was no way in hell I was going to stay in that bed, especially with him hauling ass. So I was right on his heels. And we both dove into my mother's bed. Well, I remember when we hit the bed, as I said, this is all after the fact, My mother had been crying. Her eyes were swollen. She was wiping away tears and, snot. But she hadn't gone to the extreme. And I also noticed, too, that my baby sister in the bassinet over there, the 6, maybe 7-week-old baby, was making fretful noises while she was laying on her stomach. It was like, we had never noticed that she cried, but, you could hear the baby when she'd cry at night because we had the doors open for the air to circulate through the house. Anyhow, we both dove into bed, both not excited, but wondering what the hell, and she is, what's going on? Why, y'all must have had a bad dream or whatever. I can't remember what all she was saying. But I do remember that when we could coherently tell her what we both had seen, and the only thing we could describe it as was a monkey outside our bedroom window, my mother said, "Oh, now there's no such things as monkeys, around here, that's on TV or in magazines or at the Memphis Zoo." But the only thing I could compare to what I'd seen was this was the biggest monkey I'd ever seen, and the monkey I was thinking in my description was a chimpanzee. It wasn't a gorilla because we'd seen gorillas at the Memphis Zoo, or I would have said a gorilla. It wasn't an orangutan because I seen them at the Memphis Zoo. The thing that I could come closer to it relating to a 6-year-old at the time was a big monkey. And the monkey was a chimpanzee as far as I knew. Then she looks at me and my brother and said, "Well, y'all both had a bad dream. Y'all just need to go on back to bed. Well, Mama, we're not going. Well, y'all can sleep with me tonight." And that's where we stayed that night. And I can remember, it may have been we slept in the bed with her for 2 or 3 nights after that too, but it wasn't long before we ended up going back to our bedroom. But then again, it wasn't that much longer where Mama had to give up the house anyway because she couldn't make the house payment, so we ended up moving on the same property with my granddaddy and my grandmother. But looking back on it in a summary, and the things I know now and thinking about it over the years, as many reports that I've investigated or talked to people about once they realized that I knew something about this thing that we call boogers in Mississippi, was that these things are watching us all the time. We're their entertainment. As long as there's an alpha male, in other words, a husband or the significant alpha in a booger's primitive logic, being the man of the house, they wouldn't do nothing but watch. But they can recognize anywhere from 10 days or up to 2 weeks when the dominant male presence has left or vacated the premises. And that's when it's not that they're getting bold towards trying to come and take you or take up with the female of the house. It's just that they've been watching us so long that they feel like that we're a part of their family in a certain primitive sort of way. And when this type deal would occur, they would make themselves known, not on purpose, but they wasn't as they was more bold about being around and placing themselves into positions where you would start seeing them more often than you would if the dominant alpha male of the house wasn't around. Another thing that I figured out in summary, that they're young, I'm talking about Bigfoot or boogers or whatever you want to call them, when they emotionally cry, it sounds a lot like a human infant crying. And I've noticed over the years that these things will respond to babies crying or being hurting in pain through either a colic or whatever, and they cry a lot at night, being colicky or whatever, plus the fact that a dominant male was not around, probably caused this to happen, because you had to remember all the windows in the house were open, and everything that was going on in that house, including my mother being very emotional about my father leaving, and there was nothing she can do about it. I'm sure she was in there crying not only for him just leaving, but her having a very young child and 2 other young boys to raise in a house that she probably couldn't even afford the payments towards. I mean, I'm sit there and I've thought about it a million times over the years. So it made a very emotional situation that would lure one in, because I do know these things can pick up on emotions, especially over a length of time. And then to hear a very fretful newborn infant going through probably teething or being colicky or whatever in its infancy, I'm thinking that situation was too much for one not to feel like they could probably, in a way, help calm the situation down, because you got to remember this thing was cooing, making a cooing type noise, C-O-O-I-N-G, and then clicking in a little rhythmic pattern like.
It's definitely not an aggressive.
No, it was nothing aggressive about it. I think it really got caught up in the situation for it to accidentally reveal itself as it was, especially with me and my brother in the other bedroom. That's basically the first time I've ever seen one. Didn't have a clue what it was. And then I was told, as my brother was, that we both had the same dream, which I believe more in a big monkey than I would us both having the same dream at the same time at the same moment.
Now, did you ever tell your granddaddy about the dream?
Told him about it when we got older.
Not the dream, but the experience.
Yeah, told him when we got older, because basically once it occurred, like I said, I can't even tell you the time frame, but in a child's mind, it doesn't seem like we was that long in the house wanting to sleep in my mom's bed long before we had to physically move in with my grandparents, because my mother could not financially make the payments on that house.
But you weren't over there eating supper one
Nope.
night and said, hey,
Nope, sure wasn't.
you know.
Nope, sure wasn't. We never talked back to our mother back in the 60s anyway. And as a child, you'd think of it for 2 or 3 days, and then you was told you dreamed of it. And
See, I understand that perfectly.
yeah,
I mean, kids don't think that, I gotta tell somebody.
right,
You know?
right.
If something traumatic happens, they just kind of deal with it.
Right. And see, I remember all this being that time frame, because look at it like this, August. And when I remember starting to school at 6 years of age in September, back in those days, school always started the week after Labor Day. You remember back them days?
Oh, yeah. We talked, my wife and I talked about that all
Well, now they start to school the first week in August.
That's crazy. It's insane.
But
My grandkids started getting homework before they even started school.
I'm with you,
They were
yeah.
emailing
But-
mom and daddy instructions on what they need to read and write about.
But see, to even go with the time frame to more disclose when it happened, it wasn't that long. If this occurred the second week in August, we was living in my grandparents' house when I first stepped foot on a school bus the second week in September. So we're talking 3 weeks difference here.
yeah, y'all must have moved right over there.
Well, you know, as a 6-year-old, you don't care about time.
But you don't remember anything up until that point. That was the...
Nope, that was the first time, and I can see that rascal, that big monkey, draped over that fence to this day, because hell, if it had been Santa Claus, it'd have been the same thing. If it had been the Easter rabbit, it'd have been the same thing.
I understand fully.
Yeah, but I'm looking at something that don't belong. I knew what horses was. I knew what cows was. I knew what chickens. I knew what dogs. We had dogs. the whole 9 yards. But what I saw draped over that fence, the only thing I ever seen close to it was behind a cage at the Memphis Zoo, which you're familiar with Memphis.
Oh, yeah.
That was when the primate house stunk as bad as the damn lion house.
The lion house stunk the worst.
Well, yeah. Well, they didn't plan that out too well. But that led up till, and see, that's how it's harder for me to try to remember when the lightning bug incident happened. And I'm telling you all this because you've basically got that all ready.
I'm not going to use what I've written.
But my deal with the lightning bug deal was the best, even at 10 years old, and I'm saying 10 because I'm using my sister's age as the template again here. I know that when we was chasing those lightning bugs, she hadn't started to school yet. So that shows me that she was not even 6 years old. So if she wasn't 6 years old, if she was 5, and I'm 6 years older than her, that would put me at 10 or 11 years of age. But the reason I know the time of the year was because lightning bugs in the South, I don't know what they do in other places, but I have learned by traveling over the years, it's different times. Lightning bugs in the South, when they first start coming out, is normally in the early spring, which is May or April. And I do know that the reason they shine their little butts up is to draw females so they can breed. And here we go. All three of us had a mason jar running across the field, catching, and it was a competition to us. We'd catch as many, who was going to catch the most lightning bugs, because we'd get my granddaddy or my grandmama to punch holes in the top of a mason jar with an ice pick. You remember the old ice picks?
Yes.
Yep.
We use mayonnaise jars,
Yep.
but that's the same.
Yeah, well, we had the mason jars because we would always can all of our vegetables out of the garden and stuff. We each had a mason jar with poked holes in the top of it.
Yep, I remember.
And we was out in the back pasture at my granddaddy's place. Well, we was doing all this, and it was steadily getting darker. And you got to envision here, this was the back pasture where we kept horses and cattle. And the cows and the horses and my granddaddy would always keep it cut down for hay and keep it cut down for grazing purposes. And here's all these cow patties and piles out there, and we was avoiding them, but that's conducive to a lot more firefly or lightning bug activity. And the more we was running across the grass, we was kicking them up, because people don't realize that fireflies or lightning bugs stay under the blade of grass during the day. Their wings cannot take the direct heat of the sun. Just like mosquitoes, that's why mosquitoes don't come out in the daytime. But getting back to that, my grandfather had done stuck his head out the back door once and said, "Hey, y'all chaps," he'd always call us chaps, "need to come on to the house, supper's ready and it's getting dark." Of course, he knew that time of the year too, even though it was cooler at night and it was warm during the spring of the day, that was when snakes started crawling. They had just come out of hibernation, or what they go through during the wintertime, and he knew that these snakes could just come out from anywhere, anytime.
Yep.
Well, I mean, we're in the middle of Mississippi. I mean,
They out sunning during the day.
Oh yeah, well, they more come out to feed at night. So he done stuck his head out the back door several times. Second time, and we heard him when he called us in, but we was having too much fun. About the third time all this occurred, he sees something weird. We're looking, if he's looking toward us, we're kind of at a 11 o'clock position. He sees something farther to his left, our right. that was slowly along the fence line that was separating our property and the neighbor's property. Something over there where between the fence line was a hedgerow of cedar trees and other trees that had taken root from birds landing on the barbed wire, taking a crap with seeds in their mouth, and these trees would grow. But something over there was moving in this cedar thicket along this fence line. So it caught his attention. And what it was doing was standing up, and you got to remember, this is dusk dark. And this thing moving is blended in with these cedar trees as its background. He didn't know what it was, but he saw something moving. He determined later that it was slowly swaying back and forth. I've noticed over the years when these things sway, that's their body language showing that they're nervous to a certain degree. Okay. Now remember the first incident. It was swaying on the fence line. The monkey was swaying. Right. Now this thing's swaying. When he noticed it was, all of a sudden this thing drops down on all fours from standing up on two legs, and then it starts loping towards us on all fours, leading with its left knuckles on the ground.
Coming through a field?
In the same field where me and my brother and sister were yelling and squealing, young, youthful voices with a higher pitch before maturity. Well, he knew that he did not. It was one of those split-second deals. He had to make a decision. There wasn't no gun handy. There wasn't an axe. There wasn't nothing. So he barrels out the back door, and we was probably 35, almost 40 yards away from it. This thing that was loping towards us, which me, my brother, and sister was not aware of, was actually probably about 20 yards from us. So my granddaddy already knew that this thing was going to get to us before he was going to be able to get to us.
But didn't he have to come around the house?
Yes. What happened was, there was a fence line between my granddaddy and the pasture we was in. My granddaddy had an inner pasture where he would bring his cattle and his horses in every evening. We didn't understand that one, but he would bring them in every evening. It was directly because of these things, but we didn't know that then. But the other pasture we was in was connected to the other side of the big hill from the first story. We had 186 acres, and we owned the huge hill behind the house. Same hill that was, in the first story. To get through that pasture, though, there was a little bitty field ditch that was running kind of parallel with the fence. So it wouldn't have done my grandfather any good to have jumped over the fence, because then he'd had to maneuver the ditch. So he had to run more away from us to go around what he called his tractor shed, where he kept his tractor, and then go through the gate right there to get to us, which he would have got there quicker going that way than he would have if he'd have tried to jump the fence and the ditch. All the time he was running across that pasture, he started cussing and raising hell and screaming and all kind of stuff. Well, that was behavior to me, my brother, and my sister that we wasn't used to seeing from my granddaddy. Very humorous. He was funny. He loved people. Everybody loved my granddaddy, but he just would never just... Actually, I thought, in my own personal opinion, it was kind of like a cartoon. When me and my brother and my sister first noticed him raising all this cane, we stopped immediately what we're doing, because this was behavior that my grandfather never did. And I can just envision us stopping doing what we're doing, and here we go, turn all our heads and looking directly at our granddaddy. Well, when we seen him running, and that was the first time I ever seen my granddaddy running physically. This man was right at 60 years old at that time. I'm not saying 60-year-old people cannot run. I'm just saying my granddaddy, I'd never seen him run in my life. He's never had a reason to. But we noticed that he's getting it as fast as he could get it. But we noticed he was still yelling and screaming and possibly even cussing. Anything he could do. It was just like we thought he went plumb crazy until we noticed that he wasn't looking at us. He was looking past us, farther this side. Well, when we noticed that, here we're coming back to the cartoon again. I can envision all three of our heads once we determined that he wasn't doing this screaming and hell raising for us. He was looking at something to our right. So we all turned our head and looked that way. Well, when we did, here we see this big ass monkey again, and now he's more like a chimpanzee because he's loping towards us, leading with his left hand. I noticed it was a knuckle walker, it was on all fours, and it was loping towards us. It wasn't walking on two legs. Again, like I said about my brother earlier, when my brother seen this, he hauled ass. I think he almost knocked my grandfather down trying to get to me and my sister. He didn't let my grandfather's presence deter him or nothing. Fear is contagious. And I wanted to haul ass with my brother. But my baby sister, all of maybe 4 or 5 years old, just completely, her legs melt out from under her and she hits the ground screaming bloody murder. Screaming hysterically. I've heard her cry, I've heard her pitch her fits, I've heard her when she's stung by wasps and everything else. She never reached that level of screaming up until that point in my lifetime that she did when she saw this thing loping towards us. She knew, actually, like I did, because I done already looked at my granddaddy and I noticed that this thing was going to get to me and my sister way before my granddaddy was going to get to us. And even though my granddaddy was raising 10 times worth of hell, it did not deter this thing. That's when I started looking towards it, and I was not froze in the spot, but I did not want to leave my baby sister either.
How much light was left?
Enough that I could see it. I could see it real good, especially the closer it was getting. I mean, this is dusk dark now. I ain't saying I was cavalier. I ain't saying I was a hero. I just was not going to leave my baby sister. She was sitting there just hysterically screaming. I was scared to death, the whole 9 yards. But my granddaddy was coming. Everything was, I was hoping beyond hope was going to be all right. But I also had enough sense to know that this thing was going to get to us way before he was. Now, up until this point in time, this darn thing was looking at us, and I got the general idea, not from at the moment, but when I was thinking about it later, and then thinking about it over the years after it happened. This thing did not look like it had any malicious, this thing gave me the impression it was got caught up into me and my brother and my sister chasing lightning bugs, and it wanted to play too. That's the general idea I got. That was exactly what I was thinking from what I could physically see. But as I said, I've come to this conclusion after thinking about it for over the years. Well, about this time, here I am, scared to death, put myself between me and my sister and it, because because I knew my granddaddy was coming right behind me. About this time, my grandfather actually gets within this thing's sight line. And that sucker hit the brakes and stopped. When it saw my granddaddy, even after my granddaddy was raising 200 times of hell, it was like it had turned the channel and said, oops, I done screwed up. Because what it did, it stood up on two legs as straight as it could. It did not lock its knees. That's when I learned something then that has not changed since I've been seeing these things. It had a confused look on its face, and actually it looked like, not that it was pouting, but I got caught with my hand in the cookie jar. Well, it never took its eyes off my grandfather, but it stopped within probably 8 yards of me and my sister. That's how close it was. But it took it that long to capture in its eyesight, even though he was raising hell. And see, that's what blows my mind. That's how focused that thing was on me and my brother and my sister when we was chasing these fireflies, lightning bugs. Which I've always used lightning bugs. It's all these Yankees that say, lightning bugs, what's a lightning bug? I said, it's firefly, motherfucker. You know, but just because you're ignorant don't mean I'm ignorant. I know what I'm talking about. You don't. But to make it where you'll know what I'm talking about, I'll use fireflies. But anyhow, of course, my grandfather never stopped. He was still coming toward us, and then he reached us, and first thing he did, he reached down and he grabbed my sister and picked her up and cradled her in his arms. Then he reaches over there and he pulls me back kind of behind him. Talking about my granddaddy. Well, this thing, with this stumped look on his face like, oh, I screwed up, slowly turns to its left and starts walking bipedally to the woods north of where we was. And my sister was still crying and all, but she wasn't screaming anymore. My granddaddy had her. The screaming was over with, but, you know, it was still there. And then all the time it walked until it disappeared into that cedar breaks north of us. It was looking over its right shoulder, but it couldn't turn its neck all the way around. It kind of throwed its shoulders back to look back at us. That's when I realized that its neck did not work like ours did, which makes sense in the long run, and I'll get into that in my summary. Of course, my granddaddy takes us back to the house. I knew then when it got closer to us that it wasn't a chimpanzee, it wasn't a gorilla, it wasn't an orangutan, it was something that didn't compute. And that's when, of course, my mother, my grandmother was all trying to settle my baby sister down. She didn't even want to discuss it, didn't want to talk about it, nothing. She had problems with it the rest of her life. She slept with mama, the whole 9 yards. But my grandfather kind of pulled me and my brother off to the side and told us what this thing was, as far as he knew what it was. And the only thing he could ever describe it as, that's a booger. And that's where I learned from the second time I seen one, and from anything, that my grandfather already kind of knew of these things. And he had a term for them, boogers. And not a booger up your nose, and I know that I have been castrated and crucified for calling them boogers ever since I mentioned the word. But in the South, that's what we called them, and I've learned over the years that's what 90% of the people back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and even before then, the 50s, the 40s, and the 30s, called them boogers. B-O-O-G-E-R-S. I think it's a pasteurized version of a boogeyman.